Thank you so much, and good afternoon. And thank you for coming today. Today's topic is something that's I feel very passionate about, and furthermore, I think it's going to work really well within the context of manufacturing. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Kaizen in manufacturing. And yes, next slide, please. So for today's agenda, we're going to start with a quote that really changed the way I look at things. Next, we're going to talk about what is Kaizen exactly. And then after that, why Kaizen? Why should we do it at all? Followed by the meat of the presentation, which will be the tools, various tools and techniques. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions. Next slide, please. This is a quote that really changed the way I look at things. This was said by Deng Xiaoping. He said, and just to give some context, this was around the time when, this is about 40 or more years ago, when China was really starting to ramp up. And what he said was, the basic point is, we must acknowledge that we're backward, that many of our ways of doing things are inappropriate, and that we need to change. This phrase really captures the spirit of Kaizen. No, not that people are backward, but that people need to change, situations change, times change. And so we must be ready to weather challenges, and we must remain flexible. And most importantly, we need to take steps toward improvement. And of course, that's exactly what happened in China, and the rest is history. China's become the second largest economy in the world, as well as very dominant in a number of industries. So this is really where it started, looking at where are we right now, where do we want to be, and how do we get there? So that's what we're going to talk about today. If we can go to the next slide, please. Well, the question is, what is Kaizen? Well, Kaizen basically is the art and the science of continuous improvement. It's a Chinese and Japanese word for improvement or change for better. Kaizen in Japanese, Daishan in Chinese. Kaizen says that our way of life, including our work life, social life, and even home life, should be constantly improved. As Taiichi Ohno, founder of the Toyota production system, says, re-improve what was improved for further improvement. So Kaizen involves asking small questions, thinking small thoughts, taking small actions. And importantly, Kaizen focuses on the process, not the person. We're going to talk a little bit about this later in the presentation. What Kaizen does really well is it focuses on adding value. What do we mean by value? Well, value is defined as any action or process that a customer would be willing to pay for. And similarly, waste is defined as a process that adds no value. So we're going to talk about waste definitely in this presentation because it's really important, especially in a manufacturing environment. So one more thing to point out though is results are not everything, nor the only thing. There's other things too we're interested in, such as employee morale, participation, discipline, building communication skills, building relationships. So all of those are really very important too. So that's just a little snapshot of what Kaizen is. We're going to get into more details on it soon. And on the next slide, we'll talk about what it is. Some people have asked, is Kaizen different from innovation? Is it the same? It's different, again, because it involves small incremental improvements made on a regular basis. And what's beautiful about Kaizen is it can be implemented with very simple, low-cost tools, a lot of times free tools. And most importantly, Kaizen can be applied to nearly every aspect of manufacturing. Indeed, it fits very well in the manufacturing space, specifically because Kaizen is what Toyota used during building the Toyota production system. So they really go hand in hand. So going back to innovation though, when we talk about innovation, we're referring to some enormous improvement, right? Usually as a result of some technological advancements, maybe some huge monetary investments, or maybe you get some new production technology. So you can really leap and improve many orders of magnitude. However, at the same time, innovation requires huge commitments by the teams or the company of expense and efforts. So that's something to take note of. Kaizen is a process-oriented way of thinking, helps us develop strategies that ensure this virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. And very importantly, it involves people from all levels of the organization. It's not just people on the manufacturing, on the shop floor. It's the whole company, right? And going back to people, it is people-oriented since it's directed at people's efforts, right? But we're focusing on the process, right? We're focusing on developing a better process, not focusing on the mistakes made by any individual, right? So Kaizen and innovation are not mutually exclusive. We can use them together, but we just need to understand how to leverage both in order to improve business outcomes. So on the next slide, you might ask, why should we do Kaizen? Why should we do it at all? Well, for many good reasons. Most importantly, cutting costs. That's so huge in this day and age. During COVID-19, when many companies have a lot of constraints and we're being forced to do more with less. So Kaizen can help us cut costs and, very importantly, improve processes, right? We're going to talk a lot about processes today. Kaizen is very process-oriented. And then, of course, the bottom line. Yes, Kaizen helps you increase profits. This is huge. But as I said previously, too, there's other things other than results. Kaizen helps us improve morale and also increase value to the customer, right? It's really very important. Going back to value is something a customer is willing to pay for. If we deliver something customers are not willing to pay for, well, then it's not very valuable. So for all these reasons and more, Kaizen is really beneficial to us. And so on the next slide, now we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, talking about some tools and techniques we can use in order to leverage Kaizen, right, for our benefit, specifically in a manufacturing setting. So one of my favorite tools, and it's just so very simple, is called 5S. And you'll see there's 5 S's. Actually, it's taken from Japanese, and in Japanese, all of these start with an S as well. And so hence, that's the reason why it's called 5S. 5S is one of the first tools that you should be using in a manufacturing setting or business setting is 5S. So we're going to follow these in order, right? So the first S is sort. What does that involve? Well, basically it involves sorting your workplace items, right? You go through the shop floor or the office and you sort the items. You throw out what's needed, right? And so we're going back to this idea of waste. Things you don't need to either be thrown out or recycled, right? Or put away. After you sort the items, of course, we'll need to set them in order. This involves arranging items in order, right? An example of this is keeping shop manuals in a place or putting them in an order such that you're able to refer to them very easily. So after we sorted and we've put things in order, then comes shine, which means keeping the workplace clean, free of clutter. This is so important in a factory, for example. Not having a clean factory can not only lead to lack of efficiencies, but also it might be a huge liability in terms of people getting injured. So it's really very important to keep your workplace clean and free of clutter. And again, a lot of this is very, very obvious, right? And the first 3 items are so obvious. But the fourth one, standardize. So we've gone through, we've sorted the workplace, we've put things in order, we've made it nice and everything nice and clean, but we're always getting new people. People are coming and going, and these environments can get really hectic. So what we've got to do is use checklists, right? Work standards or instructions to keep the work area clean, but also to instruct people on various practices in an office or a manufacturing setting, right? So that's really important to, after you've performed the first 3 steps, to also standardize. And finally, how do you ensure that this becomes part of the company or organizational culture and that it continues? Well, you'll have to sustain it. And this is definitely the most difficult of the 5 steps because it requires management participation, right? You can come up with as many ideas as you like, but if you don't have management support, it's really difficult to enable this to become company culture. So we've got to sustain our accomplishments and make sure that these actions are repeated consistently and repeatedly. So 5S is a really powerful tool. It's pretty much free in terms of cost, and of course there is a cost in terms of employees and obviously spending the time to ensure that these steps are followed. But the point is, it's really very simple, and it's really the first thing you should do in a manufacturing setting just to make sure everything is in order. So on the next slide. Now this is a tool that I use every single day, not just in a business setting, but also at home, is Kanban. Many of you have probably heard of Kanban, especially if you work in software development. What is Kanban? Well, it's the primary tool of a pull system rather than a push system. What does that mean? The Toyota production system is a pull system. That means supplies and parts are pulled as we need it. This is exactly what enabled Toyota to implement its famous just-in-time manufacturing methodology, right? So the thought process, very briefly, of a pull system is, we're not going to accumulate inventory because obviously there's a lot of waste associated with that. We will be discussing that on one of the next slides. But we pull the parts and supplies as it's needed, thus allowing us to get what we need when we need. And on this slide, there is a real life example of a Kanban board. I actually have something like this at home, and I've also used this, of course, in a business setting. This is a very, very simplified version of a Kanban board, likely in a manufacturing setting or in your company. If you have a Kanban board, it's likely to be quite different from this one, but this captures the general idea. And it's really as simple as having, it doesn't have to be elaborate. It's as simple as having a whiteboard with some columns, right? On the left-hand side, we've got the tasks that were to do. So we haven't started them yet. And it's as simple as using Post-it notes. And the idea is, when you start working on one of those tasks, you can simply take it from the to-do column, put it into the doing or in progress column, if you will. And of course, these are the tasks that you're working on. What's really important though, when you're doing this, is to not put too many tasks in the doing or the in progress column, because naturally there's only so many tasks you can do or that a team can do at the same time. So you want to limit the number of tasks in the in progress column, and to ensure that you're actually able to complete these tasks in a timely manner. And then finally, when you're done with the task, you can simply put it in the done column. Now, again, in real life, it's likely to look different from this. You might have a to-do column followed by in progress, followed by something like pending customer, right? If you're working on a task and then you need, the customer needs to take a look at it. Maybe you're working in software development and you need to have a customer review, or it could be pending some other team, right? In a manufacturing setting, if you're working on a large product that's composed of many different parts, well, it may need to go through various stages of review, right? So it might be pending some other team, right? Or there might be another column for QA, quality assurance, right? There's obviously, when you're building products, there's definitely got to be a stringent QA process. So it may be one of those things where you're done with your part and now it's ready for quality assurance. So the point is that you can customize your Kanban board however you like in order to meet your business's needs. And indeed, Toyota has used Kanban extensively and so have many other companies. And now I think companies are really catching on and just finding out just how useful Kanban is. And again, it's absolutely free or very cheap. All you need is a whiteboard and a marker and some Post-it notes. So Kanban is a tool that I've used very extensively and I feel very passionate about. And so on the next slide, please. The concept of Muda, or waste in Japanese, is very central to Kaizen. In Kaizen, we're looking to perform small actions in order to cut costs. But how do we do that? Well, one of the ways is eliminating waste. If you're familiar with the lean concept, lean and Lean Six Sigma are focused on eliminating waste. This is so important, especially in this day and age when companies have more constraints. We're being asked to do more with less. One of the ways we can do that is by eliminating waste. So there are 7 traditional kinds of waste. And again, there may be other categories, but these are, in the concept of Muda, these are the main ones. So the first one, which is very, very common in a manufacturing setting, is waste of overproduction. What does that mean? Well, making more goods or products than needed. We're all very familiar with this. Anytime you're making more products than you actually need, you need to think about that. Do we really need to meet these sort of production goals, right? So that's a huge one and an obvious one. Another one, though, waste of excess motion. An example is unnecessary searching for items. Let's assume you did not perform 5S and the items are scattered everywhere. You'll necessarily need more time to find them. Maybe you waste time looking for manuals and so forth and parts. That's a waste of excess motion. Another huge source of waste is waiting. What do I mean by that? Well, imagine a manufacturing scenario, a manufacturing environment in which there are multiple stations, right? Anytime an individual in one station is finished with their part and they're waiting for the next station and can't proceed, that's an example of waste of waiting. But of course, there are other scenarios too. In a doctor's office, right? This is a very obvious one. Having to wait. This is actually a huge waste because actually people's time is very important. Time costs money, as you know. And so anytime we're having to unnecessarily wait, it's a waste, and we really need to look at it. But most importantly, in a scenario, in terms of manufacturing, in a scenario in which we need to get a product to a customer as soon as possible, and anytime we're waiting unnecessarily, that's definitely a waste. Another form of waste is inventory. Example, accumulating excess items in the office or factory. We've all seen this, I'm sure. A lot of people think that, oh well, you should always have products at hand. That might be true, but if we really analyze our businesses and our factories, we'll find that there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. Maintaining a huge inventory is not always good. Why? Well, there's cost associated with that, right? There's cost of storage, storing the items. There's cost of spoilage, right? Some products spoil, right? Especially food items. So that's the obvious one. But there are costs associated with inventory, with gathering inventory, and we should be really cognizant of that. Another kind of waste is excess movement of material or transportation. This is any material movement that does not directly support the immediate production of goods and services, right? Here's an example. Manufacturing plants with function-oriented departments together, that may not necessarily be the best way to structure your factory, right? You may find that it's going to be more efficient to not do it that way, right? And anytime you're having to move material unnecessarily, that involves a waste, right? The next one is a huge one. It's defect correction. What does this mean? Well, designing products with defects in them, right? Or designing software with defects in them. There are huge costs associated with this. Imagine in a manufacturing setting, developing 1,000,000 units of a product, of which many of them are defected. In this scenario, it's really obvious to see that that a company will incur many costs associated with returns, angry customers, loss of morale. It could even become a public relations disaster. One really public example of this is, and this is not in a manufacturing setting, but it's very, very timely. The release of the video game Cyberpunk 2077 was marred with bugs. And so the company CD Projekt Red is really facing a lot of backlash from customers, and it's even damaged employee morale. So we can see how devastating it is to release products with defects in them. So it's really, really important to get it right the first time. And finally, the last waste is a waste of excess processing, redundant effort that adds no value. This is so very common, much more common than I'd like to admit. An example, designing product features the customer doesn't want, right? So, and a lot of times this happens in an engineering setting, right? The feature you think that may be so cool, right? It may very well be cool, but if the customer doesn't want it or it doesn't add value to the customer, then it's a waste, and we should really think twice about that. So Muda, the concept of Muda is huge, and we should always look at ways to eliminate waste. Now, on the next slide, the 5 whys. This is a really, really great tool to use in doing root cause analysis. What is the 5 whys? It's an iterative method to explore cause and effect relationships. Let's look at this scenario, a breakdown in the factory. So we start asking questions. Why did this machine break down? Well, because the engine overheated. Why would the engine overheat? Because it had too little oil in it. Well, why did the engine have too little oil? Because it had a leak. Why did the engine have a leak necessarily? Because there was some rust which corroded the engine. Finally, we ask, why was the engine rusted? Because of too much humidity in the machine room, which led to the machine being rusted. There you go. So by asking simple questions, we come to a resolution of the issue. Now, you won't always be able to ask 5 whys to come to the root cause. Sometimes it might be 8 whys or 3 whys. But what's really important is to start asking questions. When something is wrong, start asking questions. It'll help you to come to the bottom of the issue. On the next slide is a tool that Toyota has used very, very often. It's called Poka-Yoke in Japanese. What does that mean? It's mistake proofing a product or process by design. How do we do this? Well, we limit, or one of the ways we do it is we limit or restrict ways to complete a task. What's a great example of this? Well, in a factory, you have a color-coded design, right, on a machine that shows people how to use it, and more importantly, how not to use it, right? Another example is very simple, electrical plugs, right? You can only insert a plug one way, not 10 different ways. So it's designed in such a way so that you can use it in the right way intuitively. We have to consider the ways in which mistakes might occur and then design to prevent the mistakes. So it's really very huge. We design a product that's easy to use, and we put the quality in the product so that the users aren't scrambling or about how to use the product, right? And so Poka-Yoke is huge. You sort of go back to see what things might happen and you design around that. So it's a really great tool. And on the next slide, please. Going back to root cause analysis, the Ishikawa diagram, or fishbone diagram, as it's called, because it looks like a fishbone. This is a graphical tool that helps us illustrate the various causes for a given problem. If we go to the next slide, I will show you what it looks like. You'll note the diagram actually looks like a fishbone. On the right-hand side is the effect or the issue, right? And you'll note there is various categories, and then for each category, a cause. This is such a powerful way to graphically illustrate to your team what are maybe some of the causes of a problem. We just talked about the breakdown in the factory. Well, if a machine did break down, right, there might be various categories, right, of the machine, or various areas of the machine, right, and then various causes. So the Ishikawa diagram is a very powerful way to graphically illustrate the potential causes of an issue and really helps us get to the bottom of a root cause. On the next slide, please, is another powerful tool, PDCA. This is an improvement cycle methodology. It was actually developed as a result of solving these problems and, of course, even more importantly, preventing recurrence, right? Because whenever you resolve a problem, you've also got to make sure that it doesn't reoccur. So P stands for plan. What do? Define the problem, come up with some possible causes and solutions. Next, do, we implement the solution, right? After we implement the solution, we see, check, evaluate the results. Finally, act. If the results are not satisfactory, we go back to P, plan. Or if they are, we standardize the solution and we make sure that the issue doesn't rear its ugly head in the future. That's really, really very important. So if we go to the next slide, please, we will see PDCA graphically, right? You see this, it looks like a circle because it is. It's a virtuous circle where we plan, we do, we check, we act, and it just continues, right? And you can keep using this in your business, in your factory, even in your home, right? It's a really, really powerful methodology for continuous process improvement. So if we move to the next slide, please, is another tool that's really so very important in a manufacturing environment. It's called value stream mapping. This is a tool for analyzing a process. Where is value being created? Where is waste being created? It identifies the flow of information, services, and goods through a process, end to end, right? So it's a really very powerful way to visualize a process flow from beginning to end, right? How does the process work? Where do we create value in this process? Where are we creating waste so we can eliminate it, right? The current state is the existing conditions in the process. The future state is where we'd like to be, right? The vision of the process. And importantly, it'll give us an option to develop a roadmap for future efforts. If we go to the next slide, please. This might be difficult to see, but this is an example of value stream mapping in real life, right? You'll see this huge sort of process drawn out, and you'll see the Post-it notes. They come in very handy, right? Kaizen tools are often free or very, very cheap. You can see here, all you need here is a piece of paper, a board, and some Post-it notes and a marker. And drawing out your process, we can identify where are we creating value, where are we creating waste. Maybe we can alter this part of the process, right? So value stream mapping is really huge, especially in a manufacturing environment, as it allows you to look at your process, look for ways for improvement, look for ways to eliminate waste. On the next slide is the final tool, and it's called Hansei. It means self-reflection. It involves acknowledging your mistakes and, more importantly, pledging improvement. In Hansei, the team holds a self-reflection meeting whereby team members, they help identify what went wrong, what went right, and creating a plan for future efforts, right? So the most important step actually is not problem solving, but it's identifying the root cause or root causes, right? Remember, once we solve the problem, we want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. What's an example of Hansei in the West? Well, sprint retrospective. Those of you who are familiar with the Scrum methodology are necessarily familiar with sprint retrospectives, during which we look at what went wrong, what went right, and importantly, for the things that went wrong, how can we ensure that it doesn't happen again? And with that, I conclude the various tools and Kaizen tools and techniques to be used, especially in a manufacturing setting. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to open it up now to any questions anyone might have. I'd be very happy to answer them. I know we went over a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time, so any questions you may have, I'd love to hear them.